Human beings can shed tears from agonizing physical pain, deep grief, helpless rage, overwhelming joy, or even just watching a moving scene in a movie. In the animal kingdom, most creatures produce tears simply to lubricate and protect their eyes. Yet humans stand out as the only species on Earth that routinely sheds tears in response to emotional resonance. Why does mental turmoil cause liquid to spill from our eyes? This physiological reaction is not a sign of weakness or a passing mood. It is a complex biological mechanism deeply intertwined with the autonomic nervous system, emotional regulation, nonverbal communication, and millions of years of human evolution. We cry because our tears perform far more than a basic biological task. They act as one of our most profound and powerful social signals. When we think about crying, most people picture tears rolling down a cheek. In reality, weeping is a full-body experience involving shifting facial expressions, irregular breathing, a choking sensation in the throat, a trembling voice, and tightness in the chest. While tears originate in the lacrimal glands sitting just above and to the outside of each eye, an authentic emotional cry is orchestrated by the brain, the autonomic nervous system, heart rate, and stress hormones. Depending on the trigger, science divides tears into three entirely distinct categories. The first is basal tears, a continuous fluid layer, secreted to lubricate, nourish, and protect the cornea from bacterial invasion and dust without us even noticing. The second is reflex tears, which flood the eye automatically when irritated by smoke, harsh winds, dust, or onion vapors, acting as a rapid flush to wash away harmful irritants. And the third is emotional tears, which ignite when we experience intense psychological states like deep sadness, physical pain, immense relief, gratitude, or profound empathy. Whenever an overwhelming emotion strikes, the lacrimal glands are signaled to pump tears across the surface of the eyeball. While some of this moisture evaporates into the air, the rest drains through tiny openings in the corners of the eyes, traveling down the tear ducts and emptying directly into the nasal cavity. This is exactly why a heavy, intense crying spell overwhelms our drainage system. The excess fluid has nowhere to go but to spill down our cheeks, while simultaneously flooding our nasal passages, diluting mucus, and leaving us sniffling and congested. This entire sequence begins deep inside the brain, where the limbic system and neural networks evaluate the emotional meaning of an event. When the brain detects profound loss, a severe threat, or a memory touching deep emotional chords, it instantly activates the autonomic nervous system. Your heart rate shifts, blood pressure fluctuates, breathing becomes rapid, and the lacrimal glands unlock. Because of this direct autonomic link, crying is an instinctual physiological reaction that is extraordinarily difficult to stop on command through sheer willpower. Sadness is the most familiar trigger for weeping. Whether facing the loss of a loved one, the end of a relationship, or a crushing failure, crying reflects our deep sense of grief and helplessness. When emotional intensity surpasses our capacity to cope, the wall of rational control crumbles and tears emerge as an automatic release valve. Looking into our evolutionary roots, this reaction is closely linked to physical pain. For a newborn infant who is completely helpless and lacks spoken language, crying is the sole survival weapon available to signal hunger, pain, cold, or danger to caregivers. As we grow into adulthood and acquire language, that instinctual alarm never truly vanishes. When physical or emotional suffering crosses our threshold of endurance, we instinctively revert to humanity's most primitive distress call. Yet tears do not belong exclusively to negative experiences. We can find ourselves weeping during moments of absolute overwhelming happiness, like reuniting with someone after years apart, or achieving a hard-won victory against all odds. Tears of joy are actually a complex blend of multiple intense emotions firing at once, sheer excitement. The profound relief of ending a period of stress, deep gratitude, and even a fleeting sadness for the struggles it took to get there. When positive emotional intensity reaches an extreme peak, the nervous system experiences an overload, remarkably similar to suffering, and tears are released to bring the body back to physiological homeostasis. Similarly, we often cry when we are furious. Hidden beneath a violent outburst of anger is almost always a deep sense of vulnerability, helplessness, frustration, or betrayal. When we feel powerless to change a situation or defend ourselves, the intense energy of our anger transforms into tears, not out of weakness, but because our emotional regulation system is working overtime to endure the strain. Chronic stress building up over time is another major driver of tears. A brutal workday, weeks of sleep deprivation, or silent lingering pressures can turn a seemingly minor inconvenience into the straw that breaks the camel's back. When our nervous system is utterly exhausted, our tolerance for frustration evaporates, and crying signals that the body has run out of energy to suppress its distress. Many people report feeling a clear sense of mental clarity, physical relief, and calmness after a good cry. For decades, a popular theory suggested that emotional tears literally flushed toxic stress hormones out of the body, acting as a form of emotional detoxification. However, modern science shows that the quantity of hormones expelled through tears is far too small to account for such a comprehensive shift. The true physical relief actually comes from the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system following a cry, which slows down the heart rate and stabilizes breathing, combined with a flood of natural painkillers like endorphins and oxytocin in the brain. But above all, crying brings the most genuine relief when it successfully attracts comfort, understanding, and support from the people around us. If someone cries in total isolation or is ignored, they can actually end up feeling more exhausted and heartbroken than before. From an evolutionary and social perspective, crying is a human masterpiece. A tear-stained face is an unmissable visual signal that communicates vulnerability, a need for protection, and a lack of aggressive intent to the surrounding community. While an infant's loud vocal cry is vital for summoning caregivers in the dark, it carries the high risk of alerting nearby predators. As early humans evolved to live in tight-knit, cooperative social tribes, emotional tears developed into a silent visual alarm, one that allowed close allies to recognize distress from a short distance without signaling vulnerability to surrounding enemies. Tears have the extraordinary power to de-escalate aggressive conflicts, soften the anger of an adversary, awaken empathy, and shift a confrontation from hostility to support. It is a tool that reveals depths of the human soul that spoken language simply cannot capture. Because we live in complex social networks, possess self-awareness, retain autobiographical memories, and can project into the future, humans can weep for events that aren't even happening to us directly. When reading a book, watching a movie, or listening to a piece of music, the mirror neurons in our brains allow us to step into another person's shoes, feeling their pain, their sacrifices, and their love as if they were our own. Tears shed over art and storytelling are not just born of empathy. They fall because the narrative touches our own stored memories, personal losses, or the deepest values we hold dear. Our capacity to cry and how we express it is deeply personal, shifting with age hormones, gender norms, and cultural upbringing. While infants use crying as their primary language, learning emotional regulation as we mature changes our crying frequency. Hormonal fluctuations during puberty, biological cycles, or pregnancy can heighten neural sensitivity and make tears flow more easily. But biology is never the sole explanation. Culture heavily dictates how we relate to our tears. Some societies celebrate public weeping as a mark of authenticity, while others view it as a loss of control. For generations, rigid gender stereotypes taught young boys that crying was a sign of weakness, forcing them to suppress their tears, while women were granted more emotional leeway. Yet, an individual who rarely cries is not heartless. They simply process and express their pain through silence, physical exertion, or creative outlets. The physical symptoms that accompany a heavy cry are fascinating physiological phenomena in their own right. That familiar uncomfortable lump in your throat, known scientifically as the globus sensation, is actually born from a physiological tug-of-war inside your body. When you try to hold back tears, your autonomic nervous system forces your glottis and vocal cords open to draw in more oxygen for distress breathing, while you simultaneously try to swallow and tense your throat muscles to suppress the cry. This conflicting muscle tension creates the physical sensation of a hard lump stuck in your throat. When we break down and sob violently, our breathing becomes erratic and our diaphragm spasms, causing those characteristic hitches and gasps for air. Our eyes become puffy and red because emotional stimulation and rubbing cause local blood vessels to dilate while fluid accumulates beneath the ultra-thin skin of our eyelids. A long crying spell can also leave behind a dull, throbbing headache caused by sinus pressure from nasal congestion, combined with sustained muscle tension across the forehead, neck, and shoulders. On the other end of the spectrum, there are times when we fall into a deep pit of despair, feeling immense pain, yet cannot shed a single tear. This is not coldness. It is often a neural freeze response, a psychological defense mechanism against overwhelming trauma, or the result of chronic emotional suppression that has severed the link between feeling and physiological expression. Medical conditions like chronic dry eye, as well as side effects from certain medications, can also lock the lacrimal glands down, even when the spirit is shattering. A person who cries without tears is still experiencing the full neurological storm-racing heart rate and suffocating chest tightness of grief. Crying only becomes a clinical concern when it happens incessantly, without clear cause, persists for weeks, or is accompanied by total physical exhaustion and feelings of hopelessness that disrupt daily life. It is time to retire the outdated myth that tears are a symbol of weakness or fragile character. Weeping is an innate biological reaction, not a conscious choice or a moral failing. You can weep while making tough, courageous decisions, and you can shed tears while leading others through a crisis. Allowing yourself to cry in a world that constantly demands rigid emotional armor actually requires profound courage and self-awareness. While tears can occasionally be misunderstood or misused, the vast majority of emotional weeping is an authentic automatic eruption from a stormy mind. As science continues to uncover the deep layers of this biological marvel, we see that every tear